Hello friends. A topic that keeps coming up recently is, do authors actually make real money? I recently watched a video on Connie Glynn's channel about how much money authors actually make. She comes at it from the traditional publishing side, and her video I think is pretty accurate to discussing traditionally published earnings. So I would recommend that if you want a deeper dive into earnings in traditional publishing. I will link that in the description. But when it comes to indie earnings specifically, I had somebody recently ask me, is it viable to make your living as an indie author? They were pointing out that they see a lot of indie authors just kind of promoting writing courses and content on how to become a writer. So they were wondering if it's kind of all a pyramid scheme sort of deal. I have occasionally had people in the comments challenge me on the idea that indie authors ever make very much money. I had mentioned recently that I know a number of authors that make six-figure incomes, and somebody said they didn't really believe that could be true. And then I also had somebody recently, when I mentioned that my books aren't making very much money, they asked me, I've said in other videos that I've made over $500,000 on indie publishing. What happened? Why are my books not making money anymore? So I wanted to kind of unpack everything I know about indie author earnings. My name is Lydia Foxglove. I'm a fantasy author, and I have been a full-time novelist since 2009, with a couple of exceptions, but by and large, that is how I made the bulk of my income. I've been traditionally published with 5 books with traditional publishers, and since 2016, I've been an indie publisher, so I've had some experience on both sides. When I was traditionally published, I had some good years, I had some bad years. And that is also true with indie publishing, but I do believe that indie publishing probably has more wealthy authors, particularly once you remove the well-known traditional authors from the equation and you just consider the mid-listers and the kind of more unknown authors. I think there are a fair amount of indie authors that make a living that hardly anyone has heard of, and I'm going to break down why I think that's true. But as far as I know, there is no real data on this. So, well, the research part of it has been left to disheveled editing Lydia. So the only real data I could find is Amazon said in last November of 2024, that in the 10 years of publishing, their authors through KDP have earned $3.5 billion, which tells us kind of nothing because we don't know how many authors that was. We don't know how much money these authors are making other places. That's pretty useless. Then I also was able to find 2 surveys, which are all, you have to opt in, so this is not in any way scientific data. But Written Word Media does a survey, their 2024 indie author survey results. They had over 1,500 respondents, and of those respondents, 17% of them said they were making $2,500 or more per month, with it looks like 10% are making $10,000 or more per month. So that's 150 authors just in that survey. And then there was also a survey conducted by the Alliance of Independent Authors. This was from 2022, and it said the average income for self-published authors rose 53% over 2021, reaching a median of $12,749. This survey received 2,200 respondents, and it said almost half the respondents reported income of more than $20,000. So some interesting data points, but does not really tell us how many authors are making either a good part-time or a real living wage income. As far as I've heard, Amazon has never released any data of how many authors make a certain amount of money. And it would also be very hard for anyone to know, because even if Amazon said, we have 4,000 authors that make over $50,000 a year, which I have no idea, I'm just completely pulling that number out of my head, but they still wouldn't know how many authors are making a lot of money at other places, and also how many of those authors are spending a lot of money on advertising and other expenses. So I think it's pretty well impossible to really have the data as to how many people are making their living as an indie author. I'm just going to tell you why I think that there is more financial stability in indie publishing. But the other thing that remains true is most authors do not make a living wage. Most authors make it best hobby money. So if you're asking this in terms of like, is this a stable career path? I would never tell anyone to pursue this without a plan for extreme instability and backup plans. So by and large, I would not recommend this career to anyone who wants to get rich or anyone who wants to have a stable income. In a lot of ways, I've just been a combination of lucky, very frugal, and having a decent skill set to keep adapting to market conditions. But it is also true that I do have a number of friends that are making a lot of money indie publishing and have been doing so for years. So it is 100% possible to make a good living as an indie publisher. I know it because I know a number of people that are doing it, and I didn't even particularly try to make friends in like the successful indie publishing space. These are all people that I knew before they went into indie publishing. They all started out in traditional publishing and then moved into indie publishing. And it just so happens that I've known a number of people who have been successful doing so. So when I started out writing, indie publishing was not really a very viable option at that time. And the way traditional publishing income works is you get your money as an advance. The publisher tries to predict how much money your book will make. Most of the time, they overestimate it, and they'll just end up with a couple of books that blow past expectations, and those books end up paying for all the books. So you're kind of playing a certain lottery that you're going to hope that your book becomes one of those few that like rocket past expectations. A very small percentage of titles on a publisher's catalog will make the bulk of the money and will kind of fund the entire publishing industry. And the advance is usually broken up into 2, 3, sometimes even more. I've heard that it's actually more common to have it broken up into more payments nowadays. But when I was published, my payment was broken up into 2 payments. The first one was upon signing the contract, which can take a while, by the way. It can take many months to get the contract signed. So let's say you get a book deal. Your book deal is for $100,000. Sounds like a lot of money. It's for 2 books, though, so each book is only $50,000. And they're broken up into 2 payments. The first payment, $25,000, of each book will come on delivery. So you get $50,000 maybe 6 months after you initially accept the offer. And then you'll get the second half of each payment when the book is accepted by your editor as like the final draft. So if you sell a book in 2025, you got paid $50,000 for 2 books. You have the accepted copy next year, you get $25,000 more dollars, and then the year after that, or maybe 2 years after that, the next book is accepted and you get the final $25,000. So already you can tell that this $100,000 has actually been spread across 3 years. Doesn't sound like very much anymore, but you also have to give 20% to your agent. Disheveled editing Lydia here again. It's actually 15% to your agent. I haven't had an agent in a while, so I just forgot, but it's only 15%. And if you have a good agent, it is definitely worth it because it's not just that they sell your book, but also they support you when shit goes down. And you pay taxes on it, self-employment taxes, so they're higher, at least in the United States. And now you're just kind of making some extra money. You're not making a living wage unless you're able to write and sell multiple books in a year, which can be very difficult for traditional authors to do because you might have many rounds of edits. You might have clauses in your contract that say you can't sell another book until this contract has been fulfilled, or maybe just not in another genre, so you have to have a career going in 2 different genres. A lot of authors I know in traditional support themselves with like work for hire projects maybe on the side, or if they're a children's book author, they might do school visits for extra money. It's pretty hard to make your living as a traditionally published author, but you know, you can make some at least solid side money. And then if you make enough money that your book earns out, you will start to get royalty checks. I had 5 books published, and none of them came even close to earning out. When you talk to a fellow traditionally published author and they said their book has earned out and they're getting royalty checks, it is very much a matter of like, oh my gosh, congratulations. It is not common, so that is a big moment for anybody to have a book actually earn out. Then, if you do earn out, what do your royalties look like? They can vary a little bit, but these were the royalties for my book Magic Under Stone. US edition, 10% on the first 15,000 net copies sold on hardcover and 12.5% thereafter. So for the first 15,000 copies, I got 10%, which would have been $1.60, $1.70, because I think it was like $16.99 for a hardcover at that time for young adult. And trade paperback, 6% on the first 35,000 net copies sold and 7.5% thereafter. Rack size paperback edition, 6% on all net copies sold. In young adult, it was pretty uncommon to do a rack size paperback. This would have been a trade paperback. It probably would have been priced at like $10, so 6%, 60 cents. And that's where the bulk of copies generally is sold, is in the trade paperback edition, unless you're really big with libraries who are more likely to buy hardcover. But either way, the max I'm getting per book is $1.70. And this does not include sales at high discounts, like on a remainder rack, special sales outside normal trade channels like book club sales. And my publisher also bought the foreign rights and the audiobook rights for the books. This is all going to be pertinent. So now let's talk about indie publishing and the reasons why I just feel, not only just based on the fact that I seem to know more indie authors that are making like a good solid income than traditionally published ones, but these are the reasons why I think that it's just easier to make a living as an indie author. One reason is royalties. If I price an ebook at $4.99 and I sell it on Amazon to someone in the US, I make about $3.40 per book. So that's double what I was making on a hardcover in traditional publishing, and way more than I would have made on a trade paperback. Now, there are some countries on Amazon where you only get 35%, so then you're making like $1.70 per book. But that's still more than the traditionally published books were making. And there's also slightly different royalties across the wide platforms. If you're in Kindle Unlimited, that can be a little different. But roughly, I'm going to say that my average indie published book makes between $2 and $3 per sale. So no matter what, every book sold is making more money than in traditional publishing. Therefore, I have to sell way less books to make the equivalent amount of money. Now, of course, I was generally getting an advance that was bigger than the amount of royalties that I ever received, or the amount of like what I made back toward the advance. But if you don't earn out any of your advances, it does get harder to sell books or to get larger advances. So eventually this starts to catch up with you in traditional publishing. In indie publishing, you can publish as often as you want, with as many pen names as you want, and as many genres as you want. This is another reason that indie authors have a lot more flexibility to make a good living, because you have the option to write different books. If you are a full-time author, that is your whole job. Writing multiple books a year is not really that unreasonable. There's been a lot of discussion here about like indie slop and people writing too fast, and my era writing very quickly. It was not always my best work. I did make the best money when I was writing very quickly. But you know, we can debate back and forth about like how quickly is it reasonable for someone to write and the books to still be good. But the fact remains, if you are a full-time author and that is all you do, writing 3 or 4 books per year is not necessarily like churning them out. Like, I can easily write 1,000 words in an hour. So if I spent 3 hours writing every day, I would be writing like 900,000 words a year. Now, of course, I'm going to take time to edit the books, you know, but all I'm saying is I could have a draft of a solid indie published book in a month, then take another month or even 2 months to edit it, and have a good book in 3 months. Oh, disheveled editing Lydia again. If you've watched a lot of my videos, you will already know this, but in case you're new here, I just wanted to repeat that this is under the assumption that a lot of the books that make good money are kind of genre fiction that's written to certain expectations, and therefore it is somewhat easier to write these types of books faster, oftentimes. If you're writing like some kind of deep literary fiction, or you're writing really long epic fantasy or something like that, yes, it is going to be much more difficult to write books that quickly and to have them be up to your standard. But we're mainly talking things like, romance and pulpier types of genre fiction, and mysteries that have common beats, things like that. So I am not saying that all books should or could be written in just a few months, even by full-time authors. And if you're in traditional publishing, your publisher is almost never going to want to publish 4 books a year from you. The other thing about indie publishing is you have a very wide amount of income streams that you can draw from. You've got Kindle Unlimited readers. You've got the wide readers on many different platforms. You can do audiobooks. You can sell special editions. You can do Kickstarter. You can publish on serial platforms like Royal Road and have a Patreon affiliated with it. There are many different types of paths that indie authors can pursue, and I have known many that have figured out okay, this is a little unconventional, but this is really working for me. Or you're able to kind of break up your catalog, you might have some of it in Kindle Unlimited and some of it wide. You might go in and out of Kindle Unlimited versus wide. You might be having your best luck selling beautiful special editions. There's so many different options that indie authors can pursue, and for a lot of authors, this can become troublesome because you might pursue things that don't work out. But if it does work, and if you're able to be adaptable, you just have a lot more options. And in traditional publishing, generally, your publisher often holds your rights, to an audiobook, for example. So if they don't sell the audiobook rights, you don't have an audiobook. When you're indie published, you have some options. So the indie author advantage comes from higher royalties, larger back catalogs, diversification of both your platforms, maybe even the type of books you write. Basically, you have more options to diversify in different ways and more options to experiment with different formats and types of marketing, types of social media, and your income might end up coming from many different sources. Currently, my income is coming from many, many different places. And of course, I have pivoted to being a little more of a YouTuber, but that was a conscious choice because I wanted to write books that were not to market. If I was still writing books to market, chances are I would be spending a lot more time writing, I would be publishing a lot more books, I would be spending more focus on marketing my books specifically, and I would be making more money on the books themselves. But I was just tired of that grind. I had a story I really wanted to tell, so I made a calculated choice to pivot into a YouTube channel so that I could take the algorithm off of the books, and now the YouTube algorithm is the algorithm that I am enslaved to. But even this choice is all part and parcel of the ability to adapt and try different things that comes with an indie publishing career. It's I complain about this stuff a lot because we all do. It can be incredibly frustrating to have to figure out different types of marketing and algorithms, But I do really appreciate that I was able to think of a new angle for selling my books and making some money while doing it, which ended up being YouTube and the associated memberships. It has given me the ability to try and build up a fan base for the books that I really love, which was something that was probably going to come slowly and would have been very difficult to make a living if I didn't have this channel. So even though I'm currently making more money with the channel than I am as a writer, I still consider this all part of my writing career. My motive for starting the channel was very much as a companion piece to the writing. And I spent a lot of time just writing before I got here. I do not think that most authors make their living in this way, in which I include what I am doing, which is making some money off of the YouTube AdSense program and running my Patreon with the bonus videos and my YouTube memberships, the Discord and all of that. But I'm also talking about the authors that seem like they make a lot of their living selling a course on how to write or how to market. I think that those are actually outliers. They're just very visible because, of course, that's what they're selling is their courses. So it can seem like, if you mainly follow like BookTube, for example, it can seem like a lot of writers are actually making their living selling courses or editing services and like supplementary stuff. But the main reason for that is that most of the authors I know that are making a lot of money, they don't have time to run a YouTube channel or to develop courses. That's why you don't see them here. They don't need to do that stuff, or they're just not interested in it. I think that this platform tends to draw people that are comfortable being on camera, are good at communicating their ideas, and are maybe just in that place in life where it makes more sense to share their ideas than it does to write the books. That's kind of where I'm at this particular moment in my career. It just made sense to run this channel and make some of my money sharing my many years of experience. And I enjoy doing it. I am very comfortable speaking to people, and I enjoy all of this. But if I'm being honest, I would rather be writing my Hidden Lands books than doing any of this. It's just that I know realistically the Hidden Lands books are not going to make the kind of money that like my smutty fairy tales are making. So I had to make a choice. Am I just going to keep writing smutty fantasy and paranormal and keep making my money that way? Or am I going to write what I really love and shift the bulk of my actual workload to something different that supplements my writing but is not actually writing? That was the choice I made, that, you know what, I would rather run a YouTube channel than spend all my time writing smutty romances that aren't really what I want to do. So the authors that you see that are primarily known for selling themselves as writing advice people, writing coaches, you're getting a mix of people who are just trying to monetize a little bit of experience they've had, people that just really love teaching, people that have a lot of experience and are currently hard up for money or just looking for something different to do. You're going to get a mix of different motives, but that is, in my experience, not the bulk of authors. I barely know anybody who actually is mainly focused on writing courses or writing social media or any of that. Now, as for addressing, like, I'm not making very much money as a writer right now, but I have talked about all the money I have made in the past. And the commenter said, like, oh, that's a little scary if you can go to making that much and not barely making anything. That's actually pretty common. That's why I've talked a lot about how important it is that if you want to stay in this business, it's very important to have good habits with your money. Being frugal and saving money. The only reason that I'm here is because I've been very frugal and I've saved my money when I had boom years, because it's actually really common to have boom and busts in writing. I have seen it many times where someone will have a book blow up, they make a ton of money, and their next book is just like a flop. Maybe their next 3 books are a flop, and then they finally hit on a winning idea again. Some people just have that knack for, like, either they find a niche and they just keep publishing in it, it keeps doing well for them, or all their ideas are just gold. But it's not, you can't bet on that. I have had very erratic income my entire life. I've always managed to hang in there, but it's been up, it's been down. I expect I'll probably have some more boom years in the future, but I'm just not in one right now. And I'm like very used to this cycle at this point. So it doesn't even faze me that much compared to when I was younger, because I've ridden this roller coaster already. I've been riding it for almost 20 years now. So heck yes, that is very common. It does not mean that my prior successes were like a lie or weren't valid. It's actually just, it's super normal. And just as someone who's quite experienced can have bad years, you really can't predict anything in this business. I can't really tell you, like, what is the likelihood that you will become a successful indie published author, because it's a little bit of the Wild West out there. You never quite know what's going to grab the public consciousness and who's going to be a flash in the pan versus someone who is able to build up a sustained career. Now, I will say the people that I know who have done the best and the most consistently, the one thing they all have in common, well, for one thing, what a lot of them have in common is that they started out in traditional publishing. And there are plenty of indie authors that were not traditionally published first. But a lot of the ones I know that are the most successful did start out in traditional publishing, or at the very least with a very serious pursuit of traditional publishing, maybe to the point of getting an agent and then the agent was not able to sell their book. And I'm not saying that you have to be traditionally published first, but there is a reason that this is common, because traditional publishing demands a very high standard of work, and if you're working toward that level of publication, you have to be a good writer and you have to have a good pitch. You have to have something that will grab an agent's attention. You have to put a lot of work into really learning the craft of both the writing and the pitch. And those skills will serve you so well in indie publishing. And indie publishing has like no barrier of entry. A lot of people jump in without really knowing what they're doing. So if you have taken the time to sell a book to traditional publishing first, you have basically proven yourself that you have put the real work of becoming a writer in first. And not everyone really wants to pursue traditional publishing, so, not everyone needs to do this, but I do feel like you really need to put in the years of serious pursuit of writing quality and the hook and being able to finish projects regularly. Those are the skills that will be more likely to assure you of a solid indie career as well. Because I have seen like some fairly newbie authors have a big boom success right off the bat. Like, as I film this, the Audra Winter scandal, whatever you want to call it, is still dominating my YouTube feed. Everyone's still talking about it. And she had a ton of pre-orders based on her marketing and her pitch. But then when she released the book, people didn't like the writing quality and all kind of fell apart. And now she seems to be kind of in this tangle of editing and trying to figure out how to actually like write a good book. And I've seen lesser versions of this play out many times, where I've seen somebody have like a hit with their first book because they just really hit on a market thing. Like, I know of an author who released kind of a like Twilight-y book in the wake of Twilight, and it really blew up. And then the author really struggled to write the second book because they didn't really have a lot of experience with writing. So they just suddenly had a hit on their hands, and it was like, oh my gosh, what? Now I really need to get the second book out, and it's a struggle. If you really invest some time in becoming a better and more consistent writer with marketable ideas and a good hook in your pitches, you will have a better indie career once you actually start off with it. But the other thing that the most successful indie authors that I know have done is that they found a niche and they just consistently released books that target this precise niche over and over and over and over and over and over. Like, they had a good, like, mafia billionaire romance, let's say, and they have since released like 30 books that are all mafia billionaires. You can pick any kind of niche, but if you can just pick one and just keep writing books in that niche over and over and over and over, hitting the exact same target audience every time, that is the surest path to consistent, reliable success in indie publishing. Now, if you're anything like me, you don't really want to do that. You didn't become a writer to just churn out mafia billionaire romances for the rest of your life. And that's the number one reason why my income has dropped off, because I've written, God, how many have I written? Like 13 steamy fairy tales, and also a bunch of like paranormal reverse harem romances. So I picked like a couple of niches. I already couldn't stick to one, but I tried to pick a couple of niches that I could just stay in for a while, and that made me a lot of money because I was just releasing books that all kind of hit the same audience over and over, but I was just going nuts. This is not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. The money was good, yes, but the money was the most consistent when I just kept releasing steamy fairy tales. That was like the niche I had found, that it wasn't very crowded. I enjoyed it. I was good at it. It always made me consistent money. So if I could just write like a retelling of every fairy tale that ever existed, but make it steamy, I probably would still be making very good money right now. But that just sounds terrible. I don't want to do, I can't do it. I can't just stay in one niche forever And I had this story, this sprawling, character-driven fantasy story that I have really wanted to tell, and I just got to a point where I was like, I don't care. Life is too short not to write the things I really want to write. I will live on cans of beans if I have to write this story. Or not even cans of beans, dried beans. It hasn't quite come to that, but yeah, like, you know, so if you want to make consistent money doing this, chances are you're probably going to have to make some compromises that were not what you intended when you started writing. You're just going to have to find a niche and consistently release in it. And if that doesn't sound good to you, then you might have to accept that you're not going to make a living wage doing this, or then it might just be a little more uncertain. I do think there is another path. It is not as reliable, and it is more likely to be something that you're going to have to work toward over a long, slow, lifetime project. That's what I'm doing now. I am trying to build up my fantasy world. I'm thinking long game now. That my hope is if I look into the future, I'm going to be making a living wage off of my Hidden Lands books, because I will have slowly built up a fan base as I release more books, as I build a very solid back catalog of books that I really put time and effort into and I really cared about, and I think that they're really good and people can pick them up and read the whole saga and get really invested in it. And I don't expect it to ever make me as much money as the smutty fairy tales and the paranormal reverse harem, but it will feel so good when I get to that point, and I am starting to see that happen. I've now been at this for almost 2 years as far as this being my main focus, and I am starting to see the earnings on those books climb, but it is very, very slow compared to the previous incarnation of my indie career. So it's a very different type of strategy, and it's in most cases not going to have you just quitting your day job. But I do think there is hope if you're that kind of author, that your work is not quite as like to market, it's not written as quickly. But I wanted to give you guys some numbers so that you can see what I'm talking about as far as like how indie authors are more able to make a living with books that aren't even very popular. So my book, The Sorcerer's Concubine, for example, I released this book in 2016, so it's almost at the 10-year anniversary. This was the first book I wrote in my Hidden Land series, and for quite a long time it was the only book I had in the Hidden Land series, well, the trilogy at least. So 10 years later, in the month of August 2025, this book made $36 on Amazon, and I'm not going to look at all the other retailers, but I'm going to say that it probably sold a few copies elsewhere also. So this probably made like 50 bucks. Now, is that a lot of money? No. But if I've been at this, if I've been at my indie career for 10 years and I had published 4 books a year, and I now have a back catalog of 40 books, and each of those 40 books is making $50 a month. These are made up numbers, by the way. The reality is I have more books than that, and their income is very erratic, but this wouldn't be an unreasonable conjecture. 10 years, 40 books, $50 a month, and this is for a book that's pretty niche, not spending any money on marketing, and I'm making $2,000 a month on this back catalog. This book is currently ranked 743,000 on Amazon. It's a terrible rank. That means there are over 700,000 books making more money than this one is currently. Well, no, that's not entirely true, because a lot of books will be priced lower than mine, and a lot of authors will be spending a lot of money on advertising or covers or other associated expenses. The point I was trying to make here is simply that you can have a large back catalog of books that are ranked moderately well and be making some real money with that. Whereas if you're in traditional publishing, it's just a lot more common to publish a book that only sells 1,000 copies and then gets dropped. Whereas if you're an indie publisher and you can sell 1,000 copies, publish 4 books a year, and make $3 per book, you're making at least a pretty good part-time income. So if you can imagine multiplying that a few times, it's not that unusual to make a real living on books that are not like blockbuster sales. So that's what I'm trying to get at here. So, you know, you can't live on $2,000 a month, but it does go to show just how having a large back catalog that starts to build up over time can actually start to make some real money, even if none of your books are doing well. Like, all your books can be down in the complete doldrums of rankings and you can still be making 4 figures a month. And of course this rank, it's going to fluctuate a lot. The Potion Dealers made about $100 this month and it is ranked 482,000. This is my best-selling book of the month currently. $100 a month. Now, if I had 40 books that were all making $100 a month, I'd be making $4,000 a month. That would be great. So there are a lot of indie authors making thousands of dollars, and all they have is a larger catalog of books that are all just kind of chipping away, selling a copy every couple days. And the other thing that makes indie author publishing more viable is that you get paid by multiple vendors and you get paid monthly. So like, I'm getting money dropped in my account all the time from Amazon, from Drafted Digital, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Google Play. I'm also getting money from Patreon, Substack, Google AdSense. And this income all drops on different days, so I'm just getting money all the time. And it's not a lot, but it's very different from in traditional publishing where I would get one big check for like $40,000 and I would have literally no clue how long that check was supposed to last. Could be 6 months, could be 2.5 years. How do you plan for that kind of duration? Whereas now it might not always be a lot of money. It can still fluctuate a lot, but I do know that I'm going to get some kind of money every single month from like 10 different places. Twice a year I get an audiobook payment from some audiobooks that I sold to Tantor. So that's usually a nice little windfall. And, it's just a lot easier to cobble together an income from a lot of different sources. So I hope this breakdown was useful to you guys. I would love to know if you have any thoughts about it or any experiences, if you'd like to read any of my books. I have a new release out in September. It's called Wanted: Brooding Man Tragic Past. It is a cozy fantasy with kind of some goth vibes. That one comes out on September 22nd and it has really good spooky season vibes. So if you're looking for a good autumnal read, I hope you'll check it out. But as always, all my books are linked in the description. If you want more from me, I have Patreon and Substack. Same content on both. They both have a free tier or a membership there, or on YouTube gets you 2 bonus videos a month and access to my Discord where we talk about writing, creativity, and books all day long. I would love to see you there. I post every Sunday at 3 p.m. and often also on Wednesdays at 8 or 9 p.m. That's Eastern time if you want to catch my lives. And no matter how often or when you watch, I appreciate you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye. Such a